Hey guys, today's project is replacing a gas hot water tank. If you like these kind of DIY projects, make sure to click the little subscribe button below. And if you want to be notified for videos, click the bell next to it. But to get started, first you have to know that your hot water tank has gone bad. And the way that you notice that is because you'll usually have a puddle on the floor. Eventually these things will just rust out on the bottom. They get a lot of calcium buildup that just eats away at that steel. And to prevent that, you really should drain them, drain a few gallons a couple of times a year out of the bottom. But my tank was 20 years old, so really, I mean, it was bound to have to go. But first things first, when you see that puddle on your floor and you think you might want to do this yourself, make sure you get your water line shut off, and even more importantly, get your gas line shut off. And you can find those by just following the copper line, or you might have a plastic PEX line until you see the red shut-off valve. Or on your gas line, same thing. Follow that line until you find a shut-off valve. And like I said, that is really, really important to get that shut off before you even attempt doing any work on the hot water tank. You'll want to measure your old tank before you go buy a new one, because it'll make your life a little bit easier if the tank that you buy is really close to the same dimensions of the tank that you took out. You also want to check on the side. There will be a badge, and on that badge it'll tell you how many gallons your tank is, and the popular sizes are 40 gallons and 50 gallons, and they make those in both a shorter version, and this is the taller version. Once you've gone to the store, bought your tank, come home and drain the tank. So all these tanks will have a thread for a hose on them, and ideally you'll have a floor drain not far from the tank so you don't have to bucket all this water out. But attach a hose to that fitting and drain that tank out. And it's going to take a little while because 40 or 50 gallons of water through a small hose, it's just not a quick process. And to make matters worse, a lot of times you'll have a lot of calcium kind of clogging that shut off, so you might have to kind of poke a wire around in there to get that thing flowing again. In the meantime, I'll tell you about the tools that you're going to need to do this job. You're going to need a couple big pipe wrenches like this for all your fittings, gas and water fittings. You're going to need some Teflon tape, and there's white Teflon tape, which is for water lines, and make sure you get the yellow Teflon tape for the gas lines. You can also use a pipe compound for this. I think they're both kind of a pain, to tell you the truth. I don't know which one's easier, and if you have a lot of experience with this and you think one's better than the other, make sure to let me know in the comments. Most likely you might have to do a little bit of soldering depending on your setup, and this is all kind of setup to setup dependent. But you'll want some flux core solder wire, or rosin core they call it. You also will want some flux just to, clean those pipes up real good before you solder them, and also a little bit of real fine sandpaper is nice to pre-clean those pipes before you solder them. Some other things you might want is a pipe cutting tool. These little things are like magic. They cut these copper pipes like nothing. But in some instances, you might not be able to spin the pipe cutting tool all the way around. Like in my case, I've got a vent pipe here getting in the way. So then you might want a hacksaw just to finish that little bit of that pipe off that you can't cut. You're going to want some soapy water, and what this is good for is your gas line. You want to make sure that gas line is not leaking. So one pretty good way to check is to spray soapy water on all the fittings that you've just tightened, and make sure that there are no bubbles whatsoever. You also want to just make sure you can't smell any gas. It's got a very distinct smell. You'll want a few fittings. You might consider some of these little solderable copper sleeves. They're really cheap. They're about 50 cents each. But if you want to make your life really easy, you are going to probably want some shark bite fittings. And the real beauty of the shark bites, even in addition to just working well and sealing, is that on these big copper fittings that you'll have to get to connect the threaded side of the hot water tank to the 1/2-inch copper pipe, if those drip at all on you and you think you have to tighten them more than you originally did, if you were fully soldered in, you really couldn't do it. So with the shark bite, it kind of allows a swivel joint, and in my case, I had a little bit of a drip there that I had to tighten a little bit more in the end, and I was really thankful that I had the shark bite there. I think aside from some copper line, and like I said, this is application to application dependent, but whatever line that you have, whether it's plastic or 1/2-inch copper, 3/4-inch copper, you might just need to have a little piece of that, a couple sleeves, in case you have to adjust the height at all here. So let's go ahead and I'll kind of tell you what you really have to do to do this job now that hopefully your tank is fully drained out. The first thing you can do is disconnect your gas line, and again, just be super sure that your valve is shut off. That is so important. But to disconnect it, you'll notice something kind of interesting on these lines, and it's not just a hose going into your little regulator thing for your pilot light. It actually has this interesting, black pipe T thing, and this is a sediment trap, and that's something required by code, and it's a little bit of an annoyance because it adds a lot more threaded fittings, which every single threaded fitting is a potential cause for leak, but it's just something you have to do. So the way I like to remove this is I put 2 pipe wrenches on the fitting that connects into my big T here and unthread that. Next, I can unthread this piece of black pipe from the small T and then the bottom piece of black pipe from the T. And that allows me to then unthread the rest of the assembly from the little regulator there. So set that aside because you're going to need that when you put your new tank in, but that shouldn't take very long to do. And then next, you will want to disconnect your water lines, and depending on your setup, you're probably going to end up cutting them off. So just make sure your water is shut off so you don't have more of a mess on your hands than you need, and cut your water lines off and cut them as close to the tank as you can, just so that you have more room to work on that. In my particular case, I had couplers on couplers on couplers on this pipe, so I cut it high up, and I actually just spliced a fresh piece of copper pipe so that I had a little bit of clean pipe to put my shark bite fitting on. But now that you've got your tank fully disconnected, slide the tank out, and just you can basically get it out of there. But also just make sure that you do unthread your pipe for your blow-off valve, because again, you'll need that later. So get that old tank out of there. I think they go for like $8 at the scrapyard. So for the most part, you can get somebody to just come get your tank. If you put it on the side of the road with a big free sign on it, some guy will take that to the scrapyard. Slide your new tank in, and here we're sort of just doing the reverse of how we took the tank out, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, because the hardest part about this entire job is just going to be making sure every single fitting, whether it be water or gas, doesn't leak. And in my experience, any fitting with a thread is just a potential to be a major pain. So slide your tank back in. You should have on your new tank a little chimney adapter thing for your 4-inch or 3-inch chimney. And these have a little step in there to fit either type. Start by doing your water lines. And I really don't know if it really matters what order, but I'd just recommend starting with the water lines. And you can start to let the tank fill while you're doing your gas line. But these little couplers here, I think this is I don't know if it's a 1-inch pipe. If you go to the hardware store and just ask for a coupler to connect your hot water tank to a threaded coupler, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. This is such a common thing. But my couplers that I needed to buy were the water tank thread to 1/2 inch, because again, those are the size of the pipes coming out of my tank. So just kind of eyeball everything up once it's in here and see how much of a lead coming out of your threaded coupler that you're going to need in order to get that piece of pipe to be close to the water line piece of pipe for both the inlet and the outlet. And you're going to want maybe like 1/4 of an inch to spare on this whole thing. And also make sure that it's set up in a way that when you lift it up to get the shark bite in, you can lift it high enough, which is like right on the edge on my setup here. But when you figure out how long this little piece of pipe, 1/2 inch pipe coming out needs to be, you can go ahead and solder this. And you don't want to solder this on the hot water tank because there's some plastic pieces in here that could definitely melt with the heat of the solder. So I soldered these on the workbench. And basically then what you have is your tank sitting here with a 1/2 inch pipe coming in and a 1/2 inch pipe coming out of the tank, so that you can then couple it all together with your shark bites. The one thing you have to, of course, do before you thread your big couplers in is Teflon tape these threads or use your pipe sealant. And I like to do about 5 loops of Teflon tape, and I would say it's like, it seems pretty reliable, but at the same time I usually end up still having to tighten it a lot more than I originally thought I was going to have to tighten it. And I think that's just the name of the game with plumbing. But Teflon tape your threaded fittings and tighten these up. Tighten them pretty good, but because you have a coupler in here, you can always tighten them a little bit more later, so you don't have to go insane with it. And then shark bite in your water line. And with these shark bites, you push it as hard as you can until it basically stops, and then pull back a little bit. And if it locks and doesn't slide, then you should be well connected. But now that you've got your water line hooked up, I can tell you to turn your water on. But one recommendation before turning your your water line back on is to open a valve in a sink. And this will help from just having a whole bunch of air pressurizing in your tank. So open your valve. If you have a sink in your basement near your tank, it's nice because you can listen. You'll eventually hear that water start to come out of the faucet, and you'll know you're getting pretty close to full. So let's move on to the gas line hookup. And this, you'll want to use your yellow Teflon tape. And this tape's a lot thicker. So I didn't put as many turns of tape on it. I probably did maybe 3 turns of tape. And you're basically going to assemble each piece of pipe in the exact opposite order as you previously disassembled it. So put your short T on, put the little sediment trap on, and then your longer piece of the T. And then finally, you're going to want to put your, like in my case, I have a Flux line here. You might have something different. There's a lot of setups are very similar to this, but there's nothing like universal about this setup. On my Flux line though, there's a split washer in there, so just make sure you get that in there and snug that up. And then this is probably the most important part of anything you're doing is turning the gas back on and just checking, triple, quadruple checking that none of these threaded fittings are leaking at all. So turn your gas back on and get your spray bottle of of soapy water here and check every single part that you disconnected and reconnected. Spray the soapy water on, listen for gurgles, watch for bubbles, and just watch it like a hawk for any leaks. You also can use your sensory, your sense of smell, and just sniff and hope and try to make sure you don't smell any gas. And hopefully it will have sealed on the first try. And I think this yellow tape is pretty reliable. In this case, it sealed right up, no problem. You've got a few sources of leak in this area where the water goes in. So any new coupler that you put in, whether it be a shark bite, a solder joint, or a threaded fitting. And I mean, in my experience, it's always a threaded fitting if you're gonna have a leak. And hopefully if you get a little drip or something, you can fix it by just tightening a little bit more. But worst case, because you do have the shark bites, you can disconnect and start over by reapplying your Teflon tape and tightening it down. Just make sure that you don't forget to shut your water off when you do that, and it wouldn't hurt to drain a little bit out of the tank because you're going to have a lot of water in your lines. Now before you go to light your pilot light, don't forget to put your chimney on. It should just be a 1-to-1 swap out as far as that goes, and then you'll have a couple little screws to secure that in place. And some of these sheet metal screws are self-tapping, but I like to drill a little pilot hole on things like this so it doesn't, push the pipe out or distort the pipe at all. The last thing I would say is your blow-off tube here. So just hand thread that in. You don't need to worry about your Teflon tape. This should really never see water. It's more of an emergency thing just to make sure it doesn't blow all over the room. It just redirects it at the floor. And in my case, it's turned at like a few degree angle from vertical, which kind of annoys me, but I'm not touching it. Because if I were to turn this to try to make it straight, it could create a leak, and that's the last thing I want to deal with. So that's pretty much all there is to hooking up a gas hot water tank. You will have to, of course, light the pilot light, but depending on the brand of tank, those are all going to be different. This is a Rheem tank, so I'll probably make a video on how to light the pilot light on this Rheem tank. But what you want to do is read the instructions. They should tape some instructions right on your little regulator igniter deal here. So just read those instructions and light the pilot. But again, just be super careful because this is gas, so take a lot of caution. Any smell of gas, just take a lot of caution. You don't want any sparks if you have a gas leak in your house. So hopefully this video helped you out a lot. Like I said, if you like these kinds of how-to DIY home projects, car projects, make sure to subscribe to my channel, the Cool Stuff Guys Like channel, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching.